Okay, coffee is going, that'll be ready in just a minute. So, if you weren't here a minute ago, this is Dr. Steve Bonner. So, he was my youth and family ministry professor at Lubbock Christian University in 2007, 8, 9, something like that. I did not realize when I was, this is how I think everybody is, but when you are taking your college classes, you don't realize, you have to learn the stuff to pass the test. You don't realize how relevant it's going to be till you're actually in the field. And, over and over and over again, my first youth ministry job, I was like, I should have paid more attention to that one chapter, whatever. But he did prepare us extremely well, and I was so glad to have him as a professor. He moved on from Lubbock Christian University and got scooped up by Lipscomb in Nashville, and was there. You'll probably talk about that, maybe. But anyway, I just wanted to, real quick, just offer up a prayer of thanks and just a blessing over this time, the next 3 days. Did everybody get the notes? Do we need to print any more? All right, let's pray. God, we thank you so much for this time that you've given to us. I pray, God, that we don't take it for granted. Lord, I thank you so much for Steve and for his heart, that he's been at the forefront of just a very important ministry and this research, and empowering and equipping people like us to reach teens for the sake of the kingdom. And God, I just pray that you would allow this information to work itself into our hearts and then to flesh itself out into our actions. Bless Steve and his words, and we ask all this through Christ. Amen.
Amen. Y'all, Brad was my first student worker. All those years ago when he and Taryn were just dating. Just dating. I've known him a long time. Well, it's an honor to be with you all. My wife is here with me. She is at our Airbnb. And sometimes when I do these kind of trips, she comes with me, and then she has her alone time at night while I'm speaking, whatever. Bring a couple books, and so she's. But we enjoyed your beautiful downtown area this morning and this afternoon. Loved walking around, getting lunch. Never been to Fort Collins. It's beautiful here. So I'm honored to be here, and I hope tonight and the next 2 nights, and then Sunday morning. Am I preaching Sunday?
Yes.
Okay. I'm preaching Sunday. I hope really that they are our time together is time well spent. All right. What I'm going to do over the next 3 nights is present information as truthfully as I can. I will not mince words. I will share with you what the research shows. And I fully expect that there's going to be pushback. There's going to be questions and opportunity for some engagement. And I look forward to that. I really do. But I want to tell you this up front. This material, the adolescent stuff hits a little heavy. It hits a little heavy. And some of you are going to go like, oh, that's what's going on. Right? That makes sense. When we get into the system stuff tomorrow, and I talk about anxiety and the 5 concepts of family systems theory, inevitably, whenever I present this material, whether it's with students, adults, it doesn't matter where, it immediately gets personal. It's not something that is that we're disconnected from, if you will. We immediately start thinking about our own families, the families that we were raised in, and how that impacts us today. It was several years ago. Now, I've been teaching system stuff for several years, but I never taught it in my seminars that I would do about youth ministry. And I began to realize that I was doing a great disservice, as I began to understand just how integrated family systems theory is in parenting, grandparenting, being an effective and loving spouse, all of these kinds of things. Okay, So my sincere hope is that all of these will build on each other as we go through. Now, this is my family. This is why I do what I do. This was last year, kind of going from far right over. That's my oldest son. He's 28, he'll be 29 in August. His name is Taylor, and the woman below is his wife, Taylor. Spelled exactly the same way. And yes, we've had all the fun you can imagine with that. The young lady to Taylor's right is Meredith, and the young man on the back there is Parker. He's my second son, and that's his almost soon-to-be fiance. They both just graduated Lipscomb and are going to grad school. That's my wife, Amy, in the center. We've been married 30 years now. My daughter, Carly, this was her senior high school graduating trip. That's what she wanted to do, and we do a family trip that my wife and I take the whole family. We pay for everything, and so this is what we did, and we'll never do it again. It was so expensive. Next time I go to Disney World, it'll just be Amy and I, and then we'll just have a great time. But Carly actually, she just turned 20. So 20, and my Parker will be 23 in July, 28, and then myself. I grew up in a messed up family. I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in a home where there was physical and emotional abuse. My mom and dad divorced when I was 2 or 3, and I haven't seen my biological mom since. Oddly enough, years and years later, in 2009, she friended me on Facebook, which was really, really odd and weird, and yeah. But my stepmother was very abusive. I know now that she came from a system that was problematic. I didn't know that then. All I knew then was that I was the recipient, my sister and I were the recipient of a great deal of abuse, a great deal of emotional abuse and physical abuse, and gaslighting and manipulation, all of that you can imagine. So I'm the oldest of 4. My sister is about 1.5 years younger than I am, and then I have a half brother and a half sister. Only now have my other siblings, have begun to realize what their mother did to my sister and I. I do what I do now because of the way I was raised. I was in youth ministry, full-time youth ministry, for a lot of years, and I worked with a lot of families that, a lot of grandparents raising their grandkids, a lot of separated homes. In fact, a couple of the churches I worked in, my youth group had higher levels of divorced families than others. And I never really knew why that was. All the years later, I began to look back and begin to see, okay, I can see some things, seeds there that in these different family systems. I was introduced to family systems theory when I was in graduate school, and then specifically in my doctoral work. And it was like putting on a set of lenses that enabled me to see things that I'd never been able to see. And what I'm going to do is give you a crash course in it over the next couple days. Today's going to be about adolescence. Tomorrow and Friday is going to be building on that. How do we step effectively into the lives of adolescents and our children? How do we do this well? And by the way, I'm not going to be hitting you with Bible or anything like that. This is all psychological and sociological research that I'm sharing with you over the next few days. It's what my doctoral work is in, and it's really where my strengths are. Now, I do have a few degrees in Bible, but I just want you to know this parenting seminar is coming from a particular perspective. Now, if you want to step into the text, we can do that, but that's not going to be my primary focus. But this is the primary reason why I do what I do. Okay? I want to share with you, I have a burden to share with others what it is I've learned. Is I know that I've had access to training and information that a lot of people don't have access to. And I want to share that. Okay. So my hope is for tonight is that you'll have some renewed energy from the topics and conversations we should have today. And by the way, if you have a question while we're going along, don't stop. Don't just go ahead and ask a question. Go ahead and don't worry about interrupting me. New knowledge on the current psychosocial state of adolescence and a greater awareness of the challenges and opportunities professionally and personally. Now, I will be doing this each day, and my hope is that our knowledge, our energy, our awareness will grow with each time we're together. Okay, so what I want to talk about tonight are two markers of adolescence. Now, when I was originally doing this presentation, I was only going to do one. The one that I think is the most significant one. But as I paid attention to what's going on in the adolescent landscape, in our cultural milieu, if you will, cultural context, there's another one that I think is pretty significant. The first one, though, is multiple selves. Has anybody heard about multiple selves, adolescent multiple selves? Good. How have you heard it, or where have you heard it from?
Just in education classes.
Good.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a Greek word daisukas, that it's a multiple personality thing, so bipolar maybe even maybe.
Okay,
It's not.
so I'm glad you brought that up. We're not talking about bipolar or multiple personality disorder. That's not what we'll be talking about. But it does elicit that kind of thinking, if you will. But that's not where I'm going. Okay, so one of the things you may not know about me, all of you know, or apparently you saw the video that Brad showed you, and I was traveling. So I was in Israel, I was in Jordan, and then Egypt. And the video that you saw was I was in Taba, Egypt, and the next day we went down to Mount Sinai. So we'll have to talk about that on the side if you guys want to talk about that. But prior to me becoming a Christian, prior to getting married, prior to all my work, I was a Chinook helicopter flight engineer in the United States Army. And I'll never forget when I first came to Tennessee. I graduated high school in 1990 and tried a few things and then enlisted, actually hoping to go to the first Gulf War. Hindsight is 2020, and that was kind of stupid that I wanted to do that. But actually, I never went. Those of you who are old enough to remember, what happened? Huh?
It wasn't like a 2-day operation.
It ended in a week.
Yeah.
So I was at Fort Eustis, Virginia. I'd already done my basic training. I had already done my advanced training. We got all of our shots. Our bags were packed, and it was Christmas time. Operation Iraqi Freedom, whatever it was, happened, and then it was done before we even got shipped out. So what happened is all my orders got changed, and I got stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault. And we went down to Jacksonville to help recover all of the helicopters coming back from the Gulf War. And one of those times, I was on a helicopter flying over the Smoky Mountains. Now, I was talking to, is it Kayla? Kayla was just in Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg, like last week or something like that. Have any of you ever seen the Smoky Mountains in the fall? It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And we flew right over the Smoky Mountains. Now, the reason why I tell you this is because when I think about adolescence, I think about adolescent landscape. And I think about this time as a crew chief flying on helicopters, looking out over the Smoky Mountains and seeing this ginormous kind of patchwork quilt of trees. I could see the barns, I could see the streams, I could see rivers, and as I think about adolescence, and I think about it as from the perspective of a landscape, what I want to do is I want to take you up into my helicopter and get a kind of a helicopter's eye view of the landscape. Now, so I'm addressing two markers of adolescence. Well, the way I taught, I started thinking about this after I had you, Brad, but thinking about looking ahead, if we can kind of get a bird's eye view, if you will, of what's going on with adolescence, we can identify the markers, those things that we've got to kind of navigate in order to effectively engage them, then we're going to do that much better engaging. We know what's coming, right? At that altitude, we could see what's coming. I could see the terrain, I could see the barns, that's kind of the idea. Getting a bird's eye view of the adolescent landscape. But I want to be a little cliche too. Here we have an iceberg. Now, much has been published. Much has been published in books and in the media about adolescence. There's no shortage of that. And in particularly, members of the latest generational cohort. Anybody know what they're called? Huh? Gen Z. Gen Z, right? Gen Z. What I want to do in this presentation is not only get a bird's eye view, but another way of thinking about it, if this helps, is I want to dive below. I want to go below broad generalizations. Broad generalizations skimmed from ambiguous research and consider one of the most significant markers of adolescence, multiple selves. Yes?
What ages are you discussing for adolescence? What do you...
Yeah, great question. So I'm talking about early, middle, and late adolescence. Some will think of, and I'll talk about adolescence, the different age kind of breakers there. Any of you heard emerging adulthood? But you've heard of like middle adolescence or early adolescence? You've heard of adolescence? All right, good. All right, we're on the same page. So I'm talking about basically junior high and high school, and maybe even into college.
Okay.
Much of my research at Lubbock Christian dealt with extended adolescence. That is, why is mid-adolescence, high school psychosocial phenomenon, extending into the college years? And unfortunately, it's not stopped. It's not stopped. That make sense? Okay. All right. So here's a quote from Over Our Heads by Robert Keegan. Environments that are weighted too heavily in the direction of challenge without adequate support are toxic. They promote defensiveness and constriction. Those weighted too heavily towards support without adequate challenge are ultimately boring. They promote devitalization. Now, as parents and grandparents, we've got any teachers in here? Got any coaches? Okay, what kind of fields do we have in here? It's good to kind of know, just kind of shout some out. Contractor, good.
HR.
HR?
Former federal employee.
Former federal employee, okay. Water? Yeah. Nurse, good. Anybody else?
Engineer.
Engineer? Are there no teachers in here?
We left them at home.
Retired teacher? Huh? Yeah, okay. This is the first audience I've been in front of a long time that hadn't have teachers in here. What's that? Homeschooler? Okay. Well, yeah, you're a teacher. I saw your hand go up.
Research and development coach.
Okay. All right. Good. As parents, grandparents, teachers, coaches, we have expectations of our children, right? I mean, we have expectations of our children. We have expectations of our students on how they should behave, maybe even how they perform, maybe even perhaps how they should think critically, be trustworthy, and possess common sense. Although these may be good expectations of how adolescents should behave, if you think about it, they're really expectations of how we want them to know. Just let that sink just a little bit. They're expectations about how we want them to know. That is, engage the world around them. How we want them to know and how we expect them to make meaning of their experiences. That is, we project on them our expectations, and it's really about how they know, how they experience meaning in their lives and in their relationships. Now, I'm going to build on this, but I'm kind of jumping right into the deep end here. Our expectations are really about wanting them to subordinate their perspective, think their point of view, to our point of view. Okay? That is another perspective. And it's an ability that Robert Keegan, who is a developmental constructivist from Harvard, he argues that requires a higher order of consciousness. Okay. Those of us who are able to willingly subordinate our point of view for another's point of view, another's perspective, according to Robert Keegan, are operating in third and fourth orders of consciousness. I'm not going to talk about the details of all of that. That's a whole nother presentation. But adolescents are barely in two. Okay? Barely in two. But what's interesting is most adults think they're functioning at a higher level than they're really capable of functioning. Okay? Just kind of keep that here, hold that close. Hurt 2.0. I studied under Chap Clark at Fuller Theological Seminary, and this was the second book that he published several years ago. And in his research, what he found was that adolescents are experiencing conflicting social contexts. Now, I want you to start kind of thinking here. This room right here, all of us in here, are a unique system. Okay? Your family is a unique system. The workplace, this church, is a unique system. And then there are systems within systems, right? And those systems within systems overlap and influence each other. Does that make sense? Think of basic kind of biology, how systems overlap and they function together in order to create a whole. All right? What he began to realize is that adolescents are being raised in conflicting social systems, social contexts. Now, this may not have been so when some of you were being raised, when you were growing up. I'm a Gen X, probably the best generation that there ever was. Right? Any Gen X in here? All right.
Moving along.
All you boomers, actually you boomers might have been raised in contexts that were more similar across the board. That is, you could go to school, you could go to church, you could go at home, you could go down to the park, and everybody was operating under the same values. That makes sense? That's not true today. It was mostly true when I was being raised in Southern California. But it's not true for adolescents, and it hasn't been true for a long time. And what's happening is these social contexts, these systems, and I'm going to talk about more what those are, they're colliding with each other, if you will. And our students are operating in these different systems, and they have to learn the value systems, the values in those different systems. And he says these multiple systems, they overlap, they collide, they compete. And what he began to realize as he was doing his research is he began to realize that as students actually try to work in these systems, try to live out in these systems are run by adults, whatever those systems are, and those adults, well, let me put it this way. Any of you grow up playing like Little League Baseball or soccer or anything like that when you were little? I did. I played AYSO when I was a kid in Southern California. Little League Baseball, these kinds of things. YMCA, maybe some of you were involved in that. What Chap Clark said is this, that all those systems, organizations, and programs that were originally designed to help young people develop into adulthood are no longer about those children. They're about the adults who are running those systems. Anybody been to a baseball game lately? Or a church league softball game? Or, I don't know, maybe some of you kids go to Christian schools. They're some of the worst. You go to a football game or a basketball game. It's not about the kids playing. It's about the parents. Right? Y'all know what I'm talking about. Right? Okay. All right. And what happens here is these adolescents are often used as a means to someone else's end. Y'all, that's objectification. When anybody is used as a means to someone else's end, that person is being used as an object to satisfy someone else's purpose. right? They are commodified, they are objectified, and they are depersonalized, and I'll talk about that more in just a little bit, and where this primarily occurs, okay? But students, and what he refers to this as a systemic abandonment. That is, they may have adults in their lives, but those adults generally are using them as a means to their own end. And I'll give some hard examples of that later. And when you add to that increased levels of social pressure and expectations, so increased social pressure and increased expectations. I mean, think about it, what we do to our kids today. Okay, I was in youth ministry when this really started happening. We, more and more, parents are trying to buy into that kind of Tiger Wood effect. Train them earlier and professionalize them at earlier and earlier ages. Right? Increased social pressure, increased expectation. Parents may mean well, grandparents may, coaches may mean well, but there is a side effect there that we often don't pay attention to. Okay, so here is a picture of the different kind of systems that an adolescent or a developing child may operate in. These are the macro, exo, micro, meso systems are taken from Yuri Bronfenbrenner's work, Ecological Systems Theory. Okay. Yes, sir.
So, I kind of learned when I was growing up that a certain amount of stress is good because it helps you grow and develop. And so, like this past year, my son started middle school.
Yes.
And he did track, and he likes to run, but he hated the competition part of it. He says, I love going to practice, but I hate the competing part of it. And I said, you know, you don't have to do this again next year.
Right.
But also look at it as you'll have stuff like this going on in your life the rest of your life, where you'll have stress and pressure, and maybe look at that as an opportunity to figure out how to deal with your stress. But I don't know exactly how to help them do that other than just support them. But anyways.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, and I have some stories that I'll share with you from my own parenting. The best thing you can do with him is continue to engage him openly about that. There's a reason why he doesn't like the competition. I don't know what that reason is, but he loves to run. Anybody ever watched the movie Sandlot? When a bunch of kids get together, they can play and have fun, and it's rarely about competition. Adults get involved, it becomes something totally different, right? And often becomes something more than what the kids want or need from it. I don't know if that's what's going on with your son, but it's something to kind of pay attention to. Remind me when I get to the sports section to tell you the story about softball. Okay, I'm counting on you. All right. Okay, so Yuri Bronfenbrenner talked about macro, exo, meso, and exo. These different systems and how they overlap. So the developing person operates in several different microsystems, like maybe peer relationships, their classrooms, their family, church. Sorry about that dangling Y right there. I converted it to PowerPoint so that it would show, and some of the formatting's off. And what happens is these systems, they operate in these systems, and what Champ Clark was beginning to recognize is that these systems that used to be on the same page are not on the same page. We can't just assume that they're on the same page anymore. Okay? Where these systems overlap, like maybe church and family overlap, that's a meso system. So every developing person has a microsystem that several that they operate in, and when they overlap in very particular ways, like the family of origin comes to church, and like this week at VBS, that then creates a meso system. Okay? When you go out from there, you have the exosystem. The developing child is not directly involved in the exosystem. But decisions made in the exosystem, like maybe the school board level, community level, stuff like that. Like I heard that CSU built a stadium. They moved their stadium from the mountains into town, right? Anybody's taxes go up? Or roads get crowded during games? Okay, so decisions made at this level impact the developing student. That makes sense? As you go further out, you have macro. This is like customs. Like where I'm from, there are certain kind of customs, like Southern nice. Anybody heard of that?
Bless your heart.
Bless your heart, exactly. Right? Like
Not that you're from the South, sweetie.
through gritted teeth. Bless your heart. Or culture.
We'll talk later, yeah.
And decisions or things at that level impact the developing student. So I show this because I want you to start thinking holistically like this. I want you to start thinking big systems and how these systems overlap. Does that make sense? Questions about this slide? Okay. So this is a growing reality. Now, Brad can tell you, I've been teaching about multiple selves for a long time. And every time I dive back into the literature, I see it expanding. But here's the reality. This is a concept that's not really kind of risen to the surface to influence pedagogy. It's not influenced teaching. I mean, I've been at 2 universities, and I'm well aware of what teachers get taught. Generally, they don't get taught this stuff. Basic psychology courses, like those psychology books, they don't teach this stuff. So it's not risen to kind of cultural awareness, right? But when I get a couple slides in and I start showing you how these multiple selves play out, you're going to start. My sense is you'll start recognizing. You've probably seen this. Yes, sir.
So like this is a concept I've thought about for a very long time, even as a young child, because we had myself that went to church, is myself that was in the neighborhood, and myself at home. So it was like I had 3 different multiple selves. Even I thought about this in high school a lot because they were very different environments. And we had this growing reality spurs this question, and you kind of hit upon it. You started to recognize your own childhood more by learning this, and we were getting into a disagreement about with a millennial, Gen X to millennial, that nothing's changed. Like to me, the things that we were dealing with in the 90s are similar to what they're dealing with now. People like to say it's on steroids today with social media and the influence of getting hit with it so hard and never stops.
Right.
But I would say like the same stuff that we were dealing with in the 90s is the same as what they're dealing with now, with different tools.
Yeah, I agree with near most of everything you said.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes. Are they dealing with peer stuff? Yes. Are they dealing with family stuff? Yes. Are they dealing with bullying? I mean, we all had bullies when we were young. They're dealing with all of that stuff. And we had social media too. Mm-hmm. All right. I know some of you had that phone that had that big long coil thing and you racked it down the hall. I mean, kids all make technology social, right? Whatever the technology is, right? You are right that today they're always on. Social media or the access, particularly what this gives them access to, gets all of us access to. We did not have that. This was first came out in 2007. And I remember, y'all remember the Razor flip phones? Oh man, those were all the rage back then, right? And then when the iPhone came out, everything changed. So yes, but here's another significant difference. When you and I were growing up, you're Gen X, right? So you raise your hand. All right. When you and I were growing up, there were basically 2 stages of adolescence. And when you graduated high school, did you know who you were generally? Yeah. I knew, and I graduated high school in 1990. I had individuated. I basically knew who I was. I still had some growing up to do, but I was making decisions. I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew who I was. Kids graduate today, high school, they don't know who they are.
Don't you think that's because they're getting mollycoddled so damn much that it's ridiculous?
Say that again.
Maybe I should leave.
Oh, no, I
Translate.
want to write on this. Did you say mollycoddle?
Mollycoddle. Oh
Mollycoddle?
my God, am I
They're
that
getting
old?
catered to.
They're getting catered to. Everything that they want, they get.
I think.
They get a participation trophy without getting their butts kicked.
We're on the same page. I think
I'm
that's
sorry, but
actually, but I think of it this way. I think that's actually a consequence of the other stuff, of the systemic event. I think it is a result.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I'm with you on that. And it creates like a ripple effect of problems for sure. But I don't think it's primary. I think it is a result of, and particularly millennial parents raising their kids and giving them everything.
Right.
Yeah, but it's the result of how the millennials were raised.
Yeah, and see, I'm sorry, but when my grandkids fall and they scrape their knee, is there blood? No, then get up. You know, I don't do the sympathy.
I hear you.
And I'm sorry, Brandis.
Do you know what Joe says? Are you bleeding?
Are you bleeding? If not, get up.
But mollycoddle?
Molly.
Anybody? That's the first time you heard that word before?
What? Yeah.
I've never heard that before. I like
God.
My grandma says
So I'm born in '63. What does that make?
You're
I'm not
kind
a baby boomer. I'm before a baby boomer, right?
of, no, you're not silent generation. You're boomer and the low end of boomer.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm born in '72. So I'm on the upper end of Gen X. So I can understand you boomers, but I can understand Gen X as well. Yeah. Okay. So this reality, it would mean admitting that what passed as good instruction or good parenting is not actually working very well. And a shift has occurred, and we often feel powerless to respond. All right, let me move on. So what's happening? Significant changes occur in the transition from childhood to adolescence. We all know this. Physical development. Did you guys know, though, that I'm just curious, just a poll here. What is the average age of puberty in our kids, in the United States today?
Like
10.
11.
I thought it was
10.
9.
9. Huh?
14.
14. The average age of the onset of puberty in the United States right now is upper 9, early 10. Did anybody know what it was in 1900?
20.
13 or 14.
16. So things have changed, right? And precocious puberty is 8 and 9.
So people are having puberty earlier, but not getting out of the parents' house until later.
That's right. That's right. So so their bodies are responding biologically to what they're exposed to at earlier and earlier ages, right? That makes sense? Earlier and earlier ages, but mentally and emotionally, or can I say cognitively, they can't handle what their bodies are already preparing them for. I mean, why does a body prepare for reproduction? I mean, biologically speaking, for survival, right? But mentally and emotionally, cognitively, they're not there. And what I'm going to argue here is that developmentally, it's extending. That is, their ability, their cognitive ability is slowing down. It's taking them longer to get to where many of us were by the time they're 21, 22. Okay. All right, so there's physical developmental changes. Generally, they're developing earlier, faster at much earlier ages, which has all kinds of issues, particularly for girls who develop the secondary sexual characteristics kick in, breast bud development, pubic hair development, all of that stuff, and they stand out and they start growing at earlier and earlier ages, and they get unwanted attention from older males. They start their period. All right, so puberty is the average onset. The average age of the onset of puberty is upper 9, low 10s, and then menarche starts about a year later. I mean, just think about it. What age, what grade are those kids in at 9, 10 years old?
Fourth and fifth.
4th and 5th grade, and they're starting their periods. When I first started youth ministry years and years ago, I would resource a nurse, a woman on our trip to carry feminine hygiene products in case later on I started training my children's ministers students to prepare those kinds of things for children's ministry. That makes sense? So physically they're changing. Cognitive advances are delayed. Okay? Their ability to reason, to rationalize, to eat right. I mean, what I'm seeing is with college freshmen is atrocious. It's problematic. And social expectations are changing significantly. Their sense of self becomes increasingly differentiated. That is, their sense of self is not internally consistent. When you and I graduated, what's your name?
Seth.
Seth, when you and I graduated high school, we knew who we were, and we understood our I, if you will. And we operated out of that I. Their sense of self is internally inconsistent. And what happens is this leads to a proliferation of selves. Cognitive advances facilitate this propagation. And you add the social pressures and conditional adult support, multiple selves are perpetuated. Okay. I'll talk about the cognitive advances in just a moment. But Susan Harder, actually from Colorado, I highly recommend this book, particularly if you've got insomnia. It'll put you to sleep fast. She says a critical developmental task is the construction of multiple selves that undoubtedly vary across different roles and relationships. Yes, sir.
So you may have already answered this, I don't know, but if you did, I missed it. Back to the previous slide. You said these things are happening.
Yes.
Do we know why? Or are you getting to that?
Yes, I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Yep. I'm kind of building my case backwards, if you will. All right, so Susan Harder is one of the prime researchers who's identified multiple selves. I want to say she's at the University of Colorado. I honestly don't recall. But this second edition came out several years ago, and it is phenomenal. And she talks about children all the way up into adulthood. And her sections on adolescence are profound. Okay, so though an adolescent can think abstractly, okay, so when does abstract thought begin to kick in? Anybody know?
16, 17.
They can start thinking abstractly in junior high. That is, they can begin to start thinking about themselves thinking about themselves. That make sense? They can think about others thinking about them. That is, they have the ability to think abstractly. This begins in junior high. And it becomes more manifest, the older, because the prefrontal cortex is developing. And as the prefrontal cortex develops, those abilities develop. But they lack the developmental cognitive ability to apply abstractions across their many socially constructed selves. And my next slide is, and I'll just show you real quick, this is where I'm going. So I'm going to show you this, okay? But I wanted to build it right here. They do not have the ability to apply abstract thought from one socially constructed self to another.
Can you give an example of that?
I'm going to. Adults, as you encounter these young people, you'll pick up on the inconsistencies in their self-portrait. Why do you act this way here, but here you're a completely different person? Or here you're really confident, but here, you're withdrawn or shy. All right, so when we engage them, we pick up on these inconsistencies. Early adolescent cannot pick up on them. They're not aware that what they're portraying is inconsistent. But a mid-adolescent can pick up on these contradictions. But they lack the developmental ability to integrate these. Now, as a second-order thinker, I'm going back to Robert Keegan. Remember? Okay, as a second-order thinker, an adolescent can understand another's point of view. All right, how many of you have adolescents in your houses? All right, Seth and
Angela.
Angela. All right. I don't know who your adolescent is. How old is your adolescent?
We have a 14, 11, and 9.
Oh, you're covering the spread. All right, so you're 14-year-old, junior high, going into high school, pretty close? Okay. All right, so I want you, I don't want to call out their 14-year-old, but can I use them as an example?
Juliet. Her
Okay.
name's
All right.
Juliet.
So your 14-year-old can understand your point of view, your perspective. Like, got to be home by 10. Maybe that's even late for a 14-year-old. But as an example, you got to be home by 10.
Is she saying that to us?
Huh? What'd you say, Seth?
Is she saying that to us?
No, you're saying that to her. You're saying that to her. And so this is a she?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So she can understand your perspective as distinct from her own. Okay? And even assure you that she understands it. Even kind of take on this point of view. The parent or the teacher would believe that not only does she understand their point of view, but is able to act on it. However, in order for her to actually hold your point of view, that is, it becomes integrated into who they are, right? In a way that she actually can identify with it, she would have to subordinate her point of view to a larger order, a larger way of knowing, a larger way of being. To subsume her point of view is what Keegan calls cross-categorical thinking. A bunch of fancy words basically say this. It requires them to be able to switch to a new level of thinking, which only comes with third order. Our adolescents don't have that ability. Okay? All right, so let me jump into this right here. You want examples? Okay. I'm going to kind of step over here if that's okay. That's taboo to step in front of the screen. All right. Okay, so think of this as an adolescent self-portrait. Think about the adolescents you know. Every adolescent, every person has a core self. An I self, if you will. I believe this. I believe theologically this is image of God. Okay, that's theologically, when I've developed this, that's where I go with this. What we found is in junior high, and this begins in junior high, is they're able to begin thinking abstractly with increased social pressure and increased or reduced adult support, or adult support that's dependent on a particular kind of performance, right? What happens is they begin to develop these unique mesos. That is, this young person develops a unique self in the lunchroom, a unique self in band, a unique self in the home, on the bus, in Met Hub, in English, in youth group. In youth group. Here's one of the implications of this. We can no longer assume that what we teach our adolescents in youth group abstractly is going to make it into their other mesos. That makes sense? Now, they might be able to take content, but full application and owning it, they don't have that ability. All right? And so what happens, an early adolescent begins developing these me-selves, these unique selves, but they don't see the inconsistencies in their developing self-portrait. They don't see that they're different here, like in cheerleading, different at work, different in the lunchroom, the locker room, whatever. All right. A mid-adolescent, actually because the prefrontal cortex is developed, they can begin abstract mapping, which means is they can begin comparing the differences in their, but they lack the cognitive ability to integrate their multiple selves. They're not there yet. So they pick up on the inconsistencies and they begin to wonder, why is it? Now, so several years ago, I taught high school, a sophomore Bible for a school. And I was teaching Romans and Galatians. Not easy books for sophomores. And what we would do at some point, we'd have this, what the students just called circle time. And I remember distinctly one of the girls in that class, she said, I'm a different person at home. And she's gifted musically. And when I'm doing my music, I'm a different person. And when I'm here, I'm a different person. What happened, we created a kind of a unique safe place where these kids were able to share some things that were going on in their homes and stuff. And she said this, I feel like I'm wearing masks. In one place I put on one mask, in another place I put on another mask, another place I put on another mask. Now, I was first introduced to this concept when I was doing my doctoral work, read Chap Clark, and then started reading other research. Chap Clark called it layers, and I'll introduce that to you in just a moment. Then reading Susan Harder. Well, when I was a youth minister in Northwest Tennessee, one of the things I did to get into the students' lives was substitute teach. And we had like a county high school, we had a freshman high school, and then we had a bunch of junior high schools. And I was in a bunch of these schools. And I had a lot of my kids in my youth group were in these schools. And what I began to realize in the junior high and the high school, I would come in and they were always short males, subs. And so I would come in and I'd like sub in English for half the day and then math in the next day. And what I would see, I would have students in one class that showed up in another class later on, and they presented as different people. A multiple self, a meso. Okay. Questions about that? Yes, ma'am.
Do you feel like this is across the board, like all adolescents are struggling with this, or do you feel it's like different topics based on that?
Great question.
The help they're getting at home, or the adults that are plugged into them, or is it an across the board thing, or is there hope for us?
There is hope, and I think churches are uniquely positioned to make a difference here. Generally speaking, this is true across the board. Okay. I can tell though, teaching freshmen, those students who come from strong, engaged homes, because they've already begun the process of individuation. Does that make sense? So they're even if they come from a strong home, they're going to experience this to some degree, because the cultural systems are so laden with values that are inconsistent with. So they're going to experience this to some degree. It's a cultural reality. How long it happens for an individual student largely depends on what's going on at home, which is why the systems piece is going to be so important.
It's interesting you say that because our 14-year-old, she just spent a week by herself in Texas at Encounter and flew to Florida on her own. And we asked her, like, oh, did you have good roommates? Nope. And I was like, okay. And she's like, well, they were from foster care. Like, they didn't, the two roommates she had was from foster care. And she immediately was going into that difference from her having a strong home life where these two roommates did not, and how much that was.
So your daughter went to Encounter by herself and then flew to Florida.
She went
Well, she went
with
with a group, Anthony, two other kids, Shay and went down.
Excellent.
From the church here, and then she flew on her own to Florida.
That's impressive. It really is. It really is. You had a question?
Doesn't this follow you through adults? We all have our own me.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Oh, yes.
I mean, I'm much different here than I am somewhere else.
Yeah, but do you know who you are?
I definitely know.
Okay, then it's not the same. Why isn't it the same?
Because I know when I can switch and when I don't.
Yes. Right? And you can choose, right?
Right.
You can choose. They don't. It's a function of self-protection. So often I get a variation of this question. Well, adults do this, and I'm like, no, those adults are being hypocrites. I'm not saying you're being a hypocrite, but when you choose to be that which you know you're not, right? When you choose to be that which you know you're not, then you're being a hypocrite. Now, me, I mean, if this is me right here, I have different roles, right? I was a professor, coach, parent. I can have different roles, And who I am in the center is the same no matter where I am, right? Now, if I choose to be something I know I'm not, that's the base definition of a hypocrite. It comes from the Greek, kritos, which basically means two-faced. Go on stage with one mask, play a role, go off stage, put another mask on, and come back on and play another role. That's the fundamental difference. What we're dealing with here is a function of self-protection. They don't cognitively decide to do it. It is a function of the environment that they're in. Make sense? Yes.
Is that something that we can, is there like a workbook? How do we guide the kids into, I guess, knowing who they are? Where's the lack? I guess, how to fill those gaps?
Say that one piece
Well, I
again.
guess, how do you fill the gaps if kids don't know who they are? How do you help them without telling them?
Based on what we've covered before so far, what do you think? What would be an effective way to step into their lives to help them individuate?
I guess trial and error.
Trial and error?
I think
I'm not
breaking.
I really don't know. Let them figure it out. I don't know.
Does it have to do with how
Acknowledge
many
what they're
circles
going
More
overlap?
adults.
Like
More
making
adults.
those-
Yeah.
those circles
The
overlap.
thing is, you might be able
More
to see it.
Yeah.
You might be able to see it, but if you try to explain it, they're not gonna understand it until they've developed some more. One of the most effective ways to facilitate the integration sooner, and I'm gonna actually talk about this,
Okay.
is for more adults to show up into these different selves.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
Right? Why adults?
Because they know who they are.
Because they know who they are, right? And so they're consistent in every environment.
And I guess you got to make sure you have the right adults that know
Exactly.
who they are.
Adults who are loving, adults who do not have agendas.
Yeah.
Years
Yeah.
ago, I was at Lubbock Christian, and a local church started a ministry to after school care for kids. Now, what they didn't tell the kids is that the real reason for doing this was to get them baptized. And when the kids found out, guess what happened to the program? It died. Thing is, they could have provided profound ministerial services, providing tutoring, mentoring, all that kind of stuff, and then relationship over time. Thing is, they had an agenda. They weren't engaging the students for the sake of the students. They were engaging the students for themselves. And when the kids found that out, they can smell a fake a mile away, right? They pulled away. And parents pulled them out. You know, these were middle school, upper elementary age kids, and they pulled out. Do you have a question, Mick?
Just kind of challenging the question that we're really needing to speed this up in any way. I mean, she was asking, what can we do to help them figure out who they are?
Right.
And I'm asking, why are we trying to race this forward so fast? I guess my question
Because
is,
someone else is
aren't
going
we-
to try to tell them who we are, and it's not going to be accurate. I guess that's where I'm coming from.
Well,
the perspective of mine is just their children going through developmental stages, and there's a process to everything, and this is all literally God's design. This is a strong group here with strong families.
yeah.
What's the hurry?
Peer pressure.
Adolescence didn't exist prior to the 1900s. In 1906, Stanley Hall wrote a book, 2-volume book called Adolescents. It was the first time began to document a shift in human development. Okay, and basically, what adolescence is a time period between childhood and adulthood. Think of it as a moratorium that didn't exist before. So then we got to ask why does it exist and it didn't exist before? Well, you go back in the 1900s and think about all of the cultural changes that were taking place then, particularly mandatory education, moving kids out of work into schools, moving them into the inner cities. All of those different kind of things created a prolonged time where this age group was together by themselves, right, without adult influence. So I'm not arguing for speeding this up. I'm arguing for understanding it so that when that child is ready, they have a strong system in place. If we're not proactive, culture will take the lead in raising our children, hands down. And
they're trying.
And it doesn't matter if they have access to one of these or not. That's why I'm arguing for this. I'm right there with you though about not speeding this up.
I think what she's trying to say is like, how do you do it and preserve the innocence of a child?
Sure.
Without exposing them to, I mean, I've seen the difference in the maturity of a child from nation to nation, just what they've experienced in their life experience. I mean,
right.
And part of, I think, the environmental issue that we're dealing with is the decadence of our society.
Sure. And about wherever we have exported our culture, I don't have the slides or the content here, but I used to present them. Whenever we exported our culture, within 10 to 15 years, the average age of the onset of puberty drops. So yeah, I think you're right. I want to live in the tension of protecting them and preparing them, right? Far too many freshmen come to Lipscomb unprepared, and then they're hit. I mean, it's like hitting a wall. They had no idea what was out there. Others come with way too much exposure, right? So what does it look like to live in the tension of making sure that they're not exposed to these things? But when they are, parents, talk about it, right? My third grade son, that oldest one I showed you in West Tennessee, was riding the bus. He came home and asked us what a female part was. And my wife and I had a decision to make right then. And we decided there, hands down, that we would be absolutely honest with all of our children and give him a perspective from a godly perspective about women's genitalia and what that is and what that means. He never rode a bus again. We took him off the bus, right? Because there were consequences. We needed to respond, but we decided to actively engage. And whenever they came home with questions, we didn't shy away from them. Parents, don't be afraid to talk to your kids about sex. It is God's design. It is something that's beautiful. It's not disgusting when it is in the right, relationship. Unfortunately, we're not willing to talk about it. We've got to talk about these things. If we don't talk about them, it'll be like I did, and I went and got my information in other places. And when I was growing up, that was Penthouse and Playboy. And I didn't grow up in a Christian home, Like I told you a little bit about my home, and that's where I learned. And that's not the way to learn. Grief, my watch is going crazy. Let me just turn this off here. I think my wife and my kids are all texting each other right now.
Before
y'all have like a Bonner chat? Well, we'll have a Bonner chat. Y'all have that? Right? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Before you move on, you wrote more adults.
Yes.
Could you expand upon that?
I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Does everybody kind of understand this? Okay. So let's move forward. By the way, late adolescence. Okay. Let me. I told you I was going to do this. How am I doing on time? When am I supposed to be done?
30 minutes.
Yeah, 30 minutes.
Woo! Goodness. Okay. All right. Let me move on then.
35 minutes.
Huh?
35.
Okay. I was afraid I was going to have enough material. Okay. As youth mature, they're introduced to increased levels of public social comparisons and conditional adult support. An adolescent's self-worth is determined by how well they perform. Or when an adolescent's self-worth is determined by how well they perform for adults in their lives, you have a proliferation of multiple selves. All right? So increased levels of public social comparison and conditional adult support at earlier ages. I'll talk about what that looks like in a minute. Performance pressures, sports, education from adults facilitates this. is a function of self-protection.
Here's what I found.
Thank you, Siri. When we couple social comparisons, she's always on cue. When we couple social, by the way, mine's English speaking. She has an English accent. Do y'all use different accents with your Siri? Okay. That was way too much information. All right. When we couple social comparisons with the conditionality of adult support, adolescents are forced to adopt a new self. High levels of conditionality lead to hopelessness, low self-esteem, and the developmental need to protect themselves. Now, so mid-adolescents have really been forced into living according to the selves that define them. They've learned to and adapted very well to their various social settings. Some of the highest performing kids, and this is in the literature, some of the highest performing kids, those whose straight A's, top athletes, etc., 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 are the most messed up, hurting the most. They've learned to perform well for the adults in their lives, and they're very, very good at it. Okay? Each me-self presents its own unique challenges. Each self has its own unique challenges. Therefore, the cumulative effect on a mid-adolescent is a highly volatile and at times hostile world. But they appear to have adapted very well. Findings reveal that during adolescence, there is a proliferation of selves that vary as a function of social context. These include self with father, perhaps even self with mother, close friend, romantic partners, peers, as well as the self in the role of student, on the job, as an athlete. Susan Harder says this: the critical developmental task of adolescence is the construction of multiple selves in different roles and relationships. Chad Clark said this in his work: the developmental characteristic of mid-adolescence is the ability to draw on abstract and complex processes of thinking. Because the reality is you can engage an adolescent and have an in-depth conversation, right? You can talk about eschatology, the study of the end time. You can talk about biology and chemistry and some very deep things, right? They can draw on those things in that self. However, they're not able to integrate such thinking across the many layers. So Chad Clark found this. As he was studying adolescents in high schools in Southern California, in the Northeast, and in the Midwest. He was in 3 different major high schools. He was seeing this. He called it layering. Layering. This was before Susan Harder published her research. And then his second edition, her 2.0, he changed the language to multiple selves. This more accurately describes, from a developmental perspective, what's going on. So you get something like this. These different masks that students wear. Development may be delayed or even arrested if there is not sufficient support for the transition to higher levels of conceptualization. So one of the things I studied at Lubbock Christian was that mid-adolescence, as a high school psychosocial phenomenon, was extending. The primary marker of that phenomenon is multiple selves. As a professor at Lubbock Christian, teaching freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, I was seeing my students as freshmen and sophomores still operating in multiple selves. And so I conducted research to find out what was going on. Why is it that mid-adolescence, which used to be 4 years, is now taken 5, 6, 7 years to traverse? And so were you there when I was doing that research, Brian? I can't remember.
Oh, did you do research on me?
Failed miserably, y'all know. Long story short, the research, and if you want some information for it, I can give it to you. But long story short, what we found is that our freshman and sophomore students were functioning on a cognitive level at that time of 9th and 10th graders published in research 15 years earlier. We were using an instrument that had been used and tested for years. And all of that research had been published. We were able to compare our results with the published research. We used 2 different instruments, because what we were trying to do is I think I was telling you this, Lubbock Christian University was moving from NC Division 3, whatever that is, to the next higher level. And what we know, sports psychologists know, is that whenever you move from one level of competition to another, your moral reasoning decreases. Do y'all know that? It is sports psychologists, ask any sports psychologist you know, it's out there, and it's well published. So we had an opportunity to measure the moral reasoning of our athletes. And woo! So we used an instrument that was designed to measure particular sports context. And we got some pushback on this because it was sports related. So we used another instrument called the DIT-2. And our sample size was about 750 students. And that was the thing that hit us. That when we got that data back, our freshmen and sophomores particularly, even some juniors, were functioning on a cognitive level of 9th and 10th grade high school students 15 years earlier. So what we began to realize is it's not that they're coming to us more stupid, it's that they're coming to us less cognitively able. Now, at Lubbock Christian, I taught a lot of this information and we didn't really do anything about it. When I got to Lipscomb, I was chair of the Bible department at Lipscomb and associate dean, and we overhauled the entire Bible curriculum based on this research to facilitate integration. And it wasn't about dumbing down the material. We didn't want to dumb down the material at all. But what we had to do as professors is we had to engage them purposely earlier when they got there, and then structure our curriculum so it touched into the different selves and not just accumulated on top of each other, but crossed into each other intentionally so they pulled it forward with them. So we intentionally, in our curriculum development, tried to facilitate integration. Okay, so research doesn't mince words here. High levels of conditional support facilitates integration of the selves. High levels of unconditional support facilitates integration. That should be unconditional. Yeah, that's right. I looked at my watch and I'm like, I'm running out of time. High levels of unconditional support, more adults, facilitates integration of the selves. To achieve higher levels of cognitive ability, integrated and congruent social scaffolding is needed. So when I was coming down college or whatever, I saw some, you see a building that's being worked on and they have all the scaffolding, right? Think of adults as scaffolding around a child, right? The more scaffolding they have and the more congruent that scaffolding is, the more effective the parenting or the development will be. When not present, cognitive development may be delayed. So Susan Harder was seeing the same thing in her research that we saw at Lubbock Christian. Unconditional and consistent adult support across the adolescent social environments enables integration. And then I've got this question. Could the lengthening of adolescence, proliferation of multiple cells, be tied directly to increasingly lower levels of adult support? I think so. And here's the thing. A young person may have a bunch of adults in their lives, but if those adults are in their lives for the adult's gain, not the benefit of the child, doesn't matter how, they're not getting adult support, it's conditional support. See that? All right, so I'm running out of time, but I want to get into objectification. All right, this reality cuts right to the heart of personhood. And this is theologically important here. It's the most difficult to pinpoint because it's often clothed in the language or rhetoric of love and sacrifice. Travel ball, right? Spend thousands of dollars taking our kid all over the country so they can play baseball in some other state, or softball or soccer or whatever. There's tremendous emotional weight here. Gotta give our kids all the advantages, right? Chap Clark's term systemic abandonment opened my eyes to this, and this is my critique of Chap's research. Chap does not go into objectification. He doesn't talk about it, and I think it's a profound misstep on his part. Relationships are essential to personhood. We all know this. We may not language it this way, but we're created out of relationship for relationship. Trinitarian relationality, right? It's essential to who we are as people. When our children are in relationships with adults that are being used, this is not true relationship, right? Our culture says that people are their interests or functions. Give me an example of that.
What do you do?
What do you do? Yeah. Right on. Right on. We believe that humans have inherent dignity, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
From birth, they're created in the image of God, and as such, they have dignity, inherent dignity. We believe that people should not be used as a means to an end. Now, when we thought about objectification or heard about objectification, we often think about how women are objectified by men. And they certainly are. Right? When men undress women and use that woman as an object, as a means to their own end, whatever that end is, that woman, whether she knows it or not, is being objectified. Often, she knows it. She can tell, right? Objectification is the act of turning a human being into a thing or commodity. Now, there is profound ontological impact here. Ontology is the philosophical study of being. It studies concepts that directly relate to being, in particular becoming, existence, reality, as well as the basic categories of being and their relations. The ontological impact on our young people is profound. When a person is objectified, they're made less than human. Their personhood is depersonalized. Humanity requires relationship, right? Thus, relationship is essential to our personhood. And Andy Wright says this, to be a person is to be our relationships. And when one's humanity is ignored, when our humanity is used or not properly acknowledged, that person is harmed. Their personhood is denied. Being reduced to a thing diminishes the humanity of the one being objectified. And I contend that adults generally are using adolescents as a means to adult ends. Okay, so where does this occur? I'm sorry if I'm going to step on toes here, but I'm 51 and I can step on some toes. So I'm just, in youth sports, this is a primary place where kids are objectified. Youth are being defined functionally through what they do instead of by who they are. Right? You think of the term student athlete. It's not a neutral term, is it? It's a loaded definition of who young people are and are not. Student athlete is someone who is functionally possessed and controlled, not encountered as a person. Our children are being defined functionally through what they do instead of by who they are.
Is this where you wanted me to remind you about softball, or is it later?
Yeah, we're right in there. I'm running out of time though.
Sorry.
Oh. Let me just play that one more time. It's not okay when we adults teach young people to play like adults.
Because you let me down, brother.
No, I'm not.
You did. I don't give what you do. You let me down. I don't care if you put in play 100%. I'll get you, buddy. Cry about that.
Just two examples, right? It occurs in sports. So I was professor at Lubbock Christian, and I went to youth camp with the church that I was a part of there in Lubbock. And I remember a parent sitting down, this was at Pine Springs, sitting down on the bench, and she was telling me about her daughter. And this family at the time lived in a little, like a bedroom community outside of Lubbock called Shallow Water. Everybody familiar with Shallow Water? Okay. And what this mother was telling me was how their daughter was playing for this travel softball team. And she came home and said, it's just not fun anymore. It's just not fun anymore. And what was happening is the parents of the travel softball team started disagreeing about the direction of the travel softball team. And so what they did is they created another one. And what they did is they told their daughters to try to get this player on their team. She was the star player. And of course, the coaches on this team were telling their daughters to try to keep her on this team. And so what the parents did is they listened to all this and they had some idea of what was going on and said, you know what, you don't have to play anymore. And so that's what she did. She stopped playing. Y'all, this is 9-year-old travel softball. This little town of barely 1,000 people had to have 2 9-year-old travel softball teams. She hated softball. It wasn't fun anymore. But when she pulled out of that, she got to play for herself. Right? Just an example. We all probably know examples of this. It also occurs in education. To teachers merely existing, students become objects to be negotiated and sifted. Now, my wife is a second grade teacher, and she and I have talked about this a lot. Students' self-worth is tied to their performance. Students and teachers in many school systems ultimately are used as a means to the adult end of promotion and recognition. So that school system that I subbed in, I actually got elected to the school board. And I got to see on different levels what was going on and how teachers in the system are used as a means to the principal's end and the superintendent's end, etc. And what happens is it flows downhill to the students, right? When self-worth is tied to performance, particularly in schools that emphasize standardized tests, students in many school systems ultimately are used as a means to an adult end of promotion and recognition. And so frustration, think about these teachers, fatigue, burdensome federal and state regulatory requirements, calloused hearts, all of this kind of combines, and what happens is these students get negotiated as objects. You don't want that student, you don't want this student's excellent, and they kind of vie. And I've actually seen this happen. I was a substitute school, and I could hear these teachers talking about them. Now, is that all teachers? No. But what I have noticed is that young teachers come in, they're pretty have a lot of ideology, and then they learn pretty quickly, right? Their old teachers ultimately use as a means to the adult end. Our children use as a means to the adult end of promotion, recognition, and job security. Y'all see it? Yeah. I have a story about my son taking the tax test in Texas, and I saw this and I was like, "Are you serious?" Well, let me show you this image. There's a picture of a little girl. This is from the mother. I'm a photographer. This is my daughter, and this is the first photo of her that I ever hated. This is her 7-year-old daughter doing Common Core homework. Students, athletes, band members, art students, all are commodified and objectified by adults when they're used for an adult-driven end. Parents, commercial interests, coaches, instructors, directors, no one's immune here. Adolescents develop the ability to reflect on how adult-driven agendas have used them for adult gain, and they pull away. Ontologically, they may not understand that depersonalization has occurred, but they can feel it. When you add the objectification and the reality that creates multiple selves, you have a unique storm that our adolescents are fighting through. The reason I share this information is so that you guys know. You might have seen some things, pick up on some things, but now you know the language. Now you know in a short amount of time some stuff that's going on there. Now, the next two presentations, I have this think, pair, share. I'm just curious here. How might these insights impact your parenting or your grandparenting? We're running out of time, so my idea was to kind of break up and kind of have some dialogue here. But instead of that, just kind of shout out, how might these insights impact your parenting?
I took mine out of school, and it was the education stuff.
Yeah. It's difficult. And my wife, who loves teaching, she struggles with this consistently. Yep. Yep.
Part of the reason for picking our school is because they didn't teach towards the standardized tests. Even one day out of the year.
Yep. When I was in Lubbock, all of our kids went to a Christian school. There was other problems there, like because it was a small school, they almost forced everyone to be an athlete. And I fought that hard. They made the kids feel awful if they wouldn't participate in athletic, on a team. Yep.
I guess I want to learn how to teach my children that working hard and doing well is important.
Yes.
But without, objectifying them or
absolutely
making them feel like I'm trying to live through them or
vicariously.
that
That's right.
Their success is all there is, and so it's like finding some kind of balance there, because you don't want them to be lazy and you don't want them to have a lack of work ethic, but you don't want them to just be driving themselves crazy trying to be the best, the very best, and comparing themselves to other students or other ideals that
and that's self-care. And that's okay. There is a difference. But what I'm concerned with, and I'm not saying you guys, but maybe we have these moments, is that when these things happen, we don't engage. We give them a little bit more room because they're just adolescents. I say horse crap. Now, an adolescent, as they move into mid-adolescence, they need to have independence, but they also need boundaries. They've got to fail. They've got to suffer. But they got to fail and suffer in safe boundaries of love and care. If those aren't there, when they suffer, they will flail. Does that make sense? So yes, I want them to fall and learn how to pick themselves up. But you better believe that I'm right there watching. You get the analogy? So I plead with parents all over to engage your kids. The more you're engaged in their lives and create a safe home environment, that when they're out there dealing with the crap, they can come home and kind of let their hair down and be okay. You will facilitate the multiple selves much faster if you create that kind of environment. Creating that kind of environment is what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. Talking about our family system. And just how, and I'm not so much going to be talking about adolescence as I'm going to be talking about us as leaders in our families. And today was a little heavy. Tomorrow's going to be a little heavy, but I'm going to be moving more practical as we go. That was one thing Brad really wanted. He wanted you guys to have something you can walk away with. I'm going to give you things you can walk away with. Okay? But today I need to set the kind of stage for just how important this is, and then how it is we can step more effectively into the lives of our kids. We got to know what's going on before we can fix it, before we can address it, before we can engage it. So, all right. I think did y'all get some new knowledge? I don't know if you got renewed energy or not, or maybe greater awareness. All right. Thank you.